The second to the last is to establish a PPP framework to increase quantum of private investments in education, and this is where the private sector can play a role, and enforce private sector involvement in the monitoring mechanism for contributory funds in education, such as the ITF, Industrial Training Fund, and ETF. And perhaps Frank would like to give further insight into this issue.
Absolutely. Mr. Vice President, very intense conversations on the use of funds in the education sector. We know that Industrial Training Fund was established to provide opportunity for training of interns and people who do the so-called IT in our school system. We also have the Education Tax Fund. We also have the other, I think, some contribution, some technology contribution as well. And so the private sector is asking, what is the accountability for these funds that have been set up over the years? And so we'll be interested to know how we can support some of these agencies of government, to work with them, to really bring about some transparency and see if we can get them to be more, to intervene in ways that are measurable and that can impact the reforms that we're talking about in the education sector, Mr. Vice President. Now, you must, one of the other critical components of the transformation we identified is the issue of the neuroscience of early child and basic education. Mr. Otobo would, of course, take us through that as well. Please.
Thank you. One of the key information that came out, evidence, is that at birth, the weight of the human newborn brain is at 25% of adult brain weight. By the second birthday, it increases to about 75% of the adult brain weight. This means, and just to break it down, the brain is made up of neurons. And by the time the child is age 2, if those neurons are not actively used because of the learning experience, they begin to die and they begin to waste away. So it's either you use it or you lose it. So it's becoming increasingly important to understand that early childhood is no longer optional. It's no longer something that we should make available to the people who can afford it. And we'd like to commend Federal Ministry of Education for actually passing the policy and establishing the policy that now ensures that early childhood, it starts from age 5 and is now part of basic education. But we would like to encourage the ministry and state government to go further to actually now execute and implement the policy because of how important it is. Very quickly, we'll go through the initiatives that were identified. We recommend that we update teacher training and pupil curriculum in line with global best practice. Establish ECCD resource centers in every state and local government. And we are pleased to say that this is one area that private sector can be actively involved in. Extend maternity leave to 6 months. In many, yes. And we actually toyed with the idea that perhaps we could give the men paternity leave as well. But I think we'll take one step at a time and start with extending maternity leave to 6 months. Minimum qualification of teachers in ECCD to be first degree. Global best practice internationally. It is time, yes, thank you. And I would like to tell an important illustration. Frank, is it all right if I quickly say that? Yes. There's a particular state government who carried out some assessments for teachers. And they had agreed with the teachers that after the assessment, no matter how they performed, they will not be sacked. So on that basis, the teachers agreed to be assessed. When the results came out, there were several teachers that did very poorly. And the decision taken then was that those who did poorly should be assigned to the early childhood classrooms. Yes. That demonstrated the lack of understanding of how critical and how important it is. And because it is, we should actually put our best teachers in early childhood. And we hope, and it is our desire and our hope, that the experience of the design workshop over the last 24 hours has actually enhanced this knowledge. Very quickly, last 2 initiatives is private partnerships on food programs, teacher training and crèches, and on the public sector side, partnerships with health institutions on knowledge dissemination at antenatal clinics. We can begin to engage with Ministry of Health, health centers, and as they come in, help mothers to understand how important it is to ensure that their children are learning through play and they're actually put in early childhood centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alero. Mr. Vice President, the participants also identified the tertiary sector as one area that is a low-hanging sector where we can have very strong and very robust public-private partnerships. We're going to have Mo take us through the substance of the sessions on the tertiary education sector. Please.
Thank you, Frank. Now, the realization is that we are currently not producing graduates properly and effectively fill the gaps that we need to fill to launch us into the economy that we want to be and the economy that we hope that we will be in the next few years. And so it became important during our discussions that we begin to think about focusing on producing graduates based on an understanding of workforce needs. What exactly do we need in terms of skills, knowledge, and competencies to move our country forward? And how can we develop those into the curriculum? And how can we base our curriculum on that? And we thought that that was cyclical because research, development, and innovation is really for the purpose of increasing competitiveness in the private sector. So we saw it as a cyclical initiative which influences the curriculum, particularly at the tertiary level. Now, in terms of initiatives that we discussed, in the long term, we thought it's important to allow flexibility in the implementation of curriculum at the local institution level. We also thought that it is important now in the shorter term to increase access to the Tertiary Education Trust Fund for public and private institutions. We also need to increase research and development activity in line with private sector needs. And we need to institute internal quality assurance and peer reviews for academic research. Would you like me to talk
Yes,
about
please go ahead. Tertiary education, please.
Right. Now, for us to advance Nigeria's economic growth and global competitiveness, we need to be able to provide accessible and relevant, high-quality technical and vocational education. Regulation and policy takes us into delivery, which takes us into access. And these are three very critical areas that we discussed during the course of this summit. Regarding regulation and policy, it is important that we reposition vocational education and establish it at par with academic degrees. It is important that the graduates of our technical and vocational institutions graduate with a sense of self-worth and understand that they are valuable contributors to the development of this economy, just as those that have gone to university are. It is also important to increase alignment between national economic policies and technical and vocational education curricula. We need to upgrade and conclude the National Vocational Qualification Framework and provide incentives to companies so as to increase private sector participation. Pertaining to delivery, laboratories and relevant infrastructure must be furnished with the relevant tools and equipment to facilitate not just learning, but 21st century learning. It is critical now that we conduct a private sector skills gap survey. And this survey will help us to determine what we need and what we lack and what we need to be able to get there. In addition, we need to expose TVET teachers and principals to industries and new technology. And pertaining to access, it is important for us to think in the long term about increasing access to TVET by licensing and accrediting private training centers. We understand that the government is doing quite a lot in this regard, but there is so much more that the private sector can contribute, and we think that it is important that they are allowed to do so. And we think that in the shorter term, we need to create a platform for online vocational studies, which will be linked to internship in the workplace.
Mr. Vice President, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, just as we get to the closing part of our presentation, I'd like to inform you that the private sector is deeply committed to working with government